साथियों, हमारी सरकार किसानों के कल्याण के लिए, खासकर छोटे किसानों के कल्याण के लिए देश के कृषि जगत के हित में, देश के हित में, गांव गरीब के उज्जवल भविष्य के लिए पूरी सत्यनिष्ठा से, किसानों के प्रति पूर्ण समर्पण भाव से, नेक नियत से ये कानून लेकर आई थी। लेकिन इतनी पवित्र बात, पूर्ण रूप से शुद्ध किसानों के हित की बात, हम अपने प्रयासों के बावजूद कुछ किसानों को समझा नहीं पाए। आज गुरु नानक देव जी का पवित्र प्रकाश पर्व है। ये समय किसी को भी दोष देने का नहीं है। आज मैं आपको, पूरे देश को ये बताने आया हूं कि हमने 3 कृषि कानूनों को वापस लेने का, रिपील करने का निर्णय लिया है।
Hello and welcome to NewsClick. We are covering today what is perhaps the most important news of the year, the withdrawal of the 3 farm laws by the Prime Minister. We have with us Paranjoy Guha Thakurta, who's been covering this movement for a long time now, as has all of us who have been following this issue. Paranjoy, the Prime Minister, while withdrawing the 3 farm laws, which started all of this, it started as an ordinance nearly 1.5 years back, doesn't seem to have said we made a mistake. He has said we were unable to explain what these laws were, how it was beneficial to the bulk of the farmers, because only a small section of the farmers were opposing it, but we seem to have failed to convince the bulk of the farmers. Now that raises a number of questions. One is, was really this the issue, or is the Prime Minister trying to, shall we say, snatch victory out of the jaws of defeat? One. Second is, of course, that this would also seem to indicate he hasn't internalized the problems of the farm bills as yet, or the ruling party refuses to accept that the bills had certain problems, and this is also why he is placing it in this particular fashion.
Okay, yes, you've raised a number of issues. Let me first try and give a rough translation in English what he said. He says, while apologizing to the nation, he used the word shama, which is like forgiveness, asking for forgiveness, apology. He said, while apologizing to the nation, I want to say with a sincere and pure heart that maybe something was lacking in our tapasya. Once again, a word which can be loosely meaning penance or a period of austerity, that we could not explain what he says is the truth, as clear as the light of a diya or a lamp, to some of our farmer brothers. And then he says today is Prakash Parv, Guru Nanak's, the founder of the first Guru, Sikh Guru, his birth anniversary. And then he says, we regret we could not convince all farmers. Only a section was opposing the laws. We kept trying and educating them and informing them. Now, as you have rightly pointed out, this is very, very clear that he does not want to concede defeat openly. But it's not just the opposition. I think the big message that has come through in the last 7.5 years that Narendra Modi has been Prime Minister of India, this is perhaps his biggest defeat. That the very fact that he has to use words like Shama, like tapasya, means that he has actually conceded defeat. Now, he is the strong man. He doesn't want to concede defeat, but like it or not, that is the message that is coming through. Now, there is a history. Of course, there's a long history, and we can discuss this. But it is very clear that the Prime Minister doesn't want to say we were wrong. He doesn't want to acknowledge not only that he was wrong, but the way the process happened. You have the ordinances promulgated in June at the peak of COVID, when the country is under a lockdown, an unprecedented lockdown. Then in September, you ram these through the two houses of parliament, and in the upper house of parliament, you don't really allow the opposition to speak, and they out on the lawns protesting. And then, look at the sequence after September. Then in November, the farmers said, Dilli chalo. And then they blocked them from coming into the national capital. They are blocked at 3 or 4 points on the outskirts. Water cannons, tear gas, roads being blocked, nails on the road. Every which way the government tries to break the back of the farmers' movement, accuses them of being anti-national, Khalistanis, Pakistanis, you name it. And finally, after all this, 12 rounds of talks, including quite a few at Vigyan Bhavan, finally the government says, yes, I'm repealing the laws. Now, we can also discuss why they did it, but it is clear that this is the biggest defeat for Prime Minister Narendra Modi since he assumed the post, since he became the Prime Minister of India in May 2014.
We've also to, of course, accept, and which the Prime Minister has accepted, that the farmers showed a kind of steadfastness that is very, very unusual. We haven't seen this kind of movements going for so long, with this sweep involving different sections of the farmers and others as well, because as you know, a lot of the families may not be farmers, but come from a farming background, and it was clear the sympathies were there. All of this is a very unusual in at least recent past 5 to 6, 7 years that we have had this government, this dispensation. We haven't seen this kind of a movement, and the ability to withstand the kind of action the government has taken.
State pressure, state oppression.
State pressure plus the, shall we say, the troll army, plus the media, which has been very compliant with whatever the government wanted to carry for a long time. And even the courts intervening and yet not intervening, setting up things but not following through on it. So all of it, the farmers have withstood this, and with a kind of unity that's very, very, very unusual. And it showed signs of now spreading beyond Punjab, Haryana, parts of Rajasthan where it really was strong, to also Western UP, and then we saw Lakhimpur Kheri. And I think if you look at this, that perhaps Lakhimpur Kheri is what really broke the back of the government's resistance, because it appeared that now UP would also come into play in the elections, and the farmers would also play a big role there. And perhaps that's a reason for the government to back off.
Okay. Again, you have raised several points. Let me start with the first point today. Indeed, in more ways than one, this has been a unique movement. I would say it's unprecedented not only in the recent history of India, perhaps the world. I mean, imagine for almost a year, more than 350 days. First, it was hundreds of thousands of farmers at 3 or 4 locations on the outskirts of the national capital in makeshift towns. And even now, I'm coming from the Tikri border. There are tens of thousands of people who've weathered the extreme weather, the heat, the dust, the rain, the hail, the winter, the cold winter, the polluted winter of Delhi, and they are still there. They are, of course, saying we are waiting for Parliament to convene and formally the laws to be repealed. I believe that this is unique. And attempts being made that this is a movement of rich farmers, Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, parts of Rajasthan. I think that myth these farmers have demolished. That there are many small farmers with small holding, landless peasants. They've had solidarity from different parts of the country, not just northern India. People have come from different parts of India. I met 2 teachers from Tamil Nadu. The farmers went to Bengal before the elections. So it was no longer the attempt to paint it rich farmers, parts of pampered farmers, the lot who're getting all these subsidies. I think these myths have been broken. Secondly, the point you made, the uniqueness of the movement is that you had more than 24 organizations, unions, associations of different political hues and ideologies who came together under the broad umbrella of the Samyukta Kisan Morcha. Secondly, the secular character and the collective leadership. I mean, secular character attempts were made. There was agent saboteurs. We saw what happened on the 26th of January. Again, there have been deaths. There have been over 600 farmers who've died, who've been martyred. But it has cut across the attempts to divide the movement on religious lines and communal lines have not worked. And the collective leadership that has been shown, in my opinion, makes this truly a unique movement. And at the end of the day, I think the government realized, as you rightly pointed out, that it was going to lose support in its bastions, like Western Uttar Pradesh. When Lakhimpur Kheri happened, when the son of the Minister of State for Home Affairs was accused of running over protesting farmers, I think that resulted in a huge amount of disquiet even within the Sangh Parivar and the Bharatiya Janata Party. I know for a fact that there were members of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS, who were the ideological parent of the BJP, who were most unhappy. It's not just a Varun Gandhi whose Pilibhit constituency is adjoining Lakhimpur Kheri, where Sikh farmers are there in substantial numbers, who's removed from the national executive. Why? Because he sympathizes. We also have the example of people like Satyapal Malik, who has been a governor of Goa, governor of Jammu and Kashmir, and now governor of Meghalaya, who's openly said that what the government is doing is wrong. So, combination of these factors had resulted in the announcement. So he tries to make the best out of a bad thing. So the announcement is made on Guru Purab, and the announcement made that we tried our best to convince the farmers. But as you pointed out earlier,
section of the rich farmers who have been holding the farmers to ransom, that is his words, really.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting, the opposition feels vindicated. It's interesting some of the views that have come from opposition parties across the spectrum. Akhilesh Yadav has said that, look, be careful, don't believe this man. If he's capable of doing this, he's not to be trusted, he can do this another thing. The Congress, I mean, Rahul Gandhi feels vindicated because on 14th January, he went categorically and he said, mark my words, the government will have no choice but to take back these laws. And the Congress said, if you can have an ordinance to extend the tenure of the director of the Enforcement Directorate and the Central Bureau of Investigation, why don't you just have an ordinance and repeal the laws? Why do you want them to wait till the 29th of November when the winter session of Parliament will happen? And interestingly, also from the BJP side, very, very predictable responses. Yogi Adityanath, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, saying, thank you, thank you. Rajnath Singh, our Defence Minister, saying, look, how sensitive our Prime Minister is. All of them are desperately trying to make the best out of a very, very bad situation for the Bharatiya Janata Party and the Modi government.
You know, it's an interesting issue that for the first time we have in India a situation, something which really touches upon the livelihood and the life of hundreds of thousands, much larger in fact, of farmers or a section of our society. is being put in Parliament without any discussion, both outside and of course inside. Now, you know, laws which affect different sections, and I think there is a long article somebody wrote about how the judges also look at the parliamentary discussions, not to see the letter of the law, but the intent of the law. And that's why Parliament is so important even for judicial pronouncements on law. But this is one time, a law is enacted, as you say, essentially as an ordinance, at a time when discussions and other possibilities are much less, and then it comes to Parliament, and it is ramrodded, as you said, without it being the minimum being done, which is to refer it to select committee, standing committee, where discussions takes place, and strengthen, if you will, the intent of the law if it was to help the farmers. To bring out, was it really to help farmers, or was it to help, as the farmers have said, the big corporate houses take over Indian agriculture. Now, without getting into the content of the laws in this particular instance, this has been the nature of this government, particularly after this time Modi won with a really large majority.
You're talking about 2019.
2019 elections, after which the Parliament has become more or less a place where it's rubber stamping whatever the government is doing. And of course, you raised the issue about the ordinances which have been brought just a few days before the Parliament is going to sit. Again, the Parliament is becoming more or less, as far as this government is concerned, a rubber stamp of whatever the executive decides. And brute majority is being used rather than allowing a discussion to take place, even if you reject the views of the opposition.
Yes. You know, Prabir, among the various institutions which have been weakened and compromised in the last 7.5 years, including the military, the politicization of the military. I mean, don't forget, Sikhs contribute a very, compared to the share of the population, there were a very substantial number of people in the armed forces. Then other institutions like that of the Election Commission of India, the Controller and Auditor General of India, and the bureaucracy, the civil services as a whole, I mentioned the military, I think one of the most important institutions, which is really what democracy is all about, are the institutions of Parliament. And these have been so weakened and treated with such contempt. Why? Because the Bharatiya Janata Party won 303 out of the 543 Lok Sabha seats in 2019. Now, I think Prime Minister Narendra Modi would not have had to apologize. Shama मांगने का ज़रूरत नहीं था. He wouldn't have to say that something was lacking in our tapasya, in this penance, if he had had consultations with the stakeholders. I mean, let's understand something. Agriculture may account for barely 17% of India's gross domestic product or national income. But even today, by any estimate, more than half of your population is directly or indirectly dependent on agriculture. You talk about India being a Krishi Pradhan Desh, etc., etc. How could you not consult with stakeholders a series of laws, 3 laws, which are going to have a huge impact on the lives and the livelihoods of more than half your population? I mean, these all have very convoluted and long-winded names. The Farmers' Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act, the Farmers' Empowerment and Protection and Agreement on Price Price Assurance and Farmer Services, and of course the Essential Commodities Act. In fact, the farmers are saying what you've said in that law, you are actually going to do just the opposite. You're not going to, in fact, make secure the livelihoods of farmers. You're not going to ensure, and the other big issue, that the minimum support price should be a legally mandated form, all of which the government was not willing to concede. And this is the price they're having to pay. A year and a half. It's your hubris and your arrogance reached a stage when you finally had to concede that, look, it's going to have an impact. One thing you must give Mr. Narendra Modi, he understands how to win elections. If there's nothing else he knows that very well, how to ensure. So this is an attempt to salvage the bypolls that took place. You saw even in states like Himachal Pradesh, where the BJP is in power, how they did very badly, lost seats they were holding. And I think they realized that the political fallout would not be contained. And therefore the pressure from within and things, and Mr. Modi decided, let's cut our losses now.
Well, we'll have to see whether cutting your losses after denying the farmers the space for discussions, the opposition for space for discussion in the parliament, trying to really control the debate as far as in public space is concerned. Of course, it's also true, once the farmers took to the streets, it was very difficult to wish them out of public space. They were very much there. They imposed themselves in public space, and of course, news channels, including of NewsClick, has been covering the farmers' movements. But even those who otherwise may not have wanted to cover farmers' movements, they have to cover it for the same reason that you have said. If 50 to 60% of India's population are dependent in some form or the other on agriculture, I would say more than that, the fact there is also agricultural roots of even the middle class. And all of this means farmers have a sympathy, which for instance the working class movements don't enjoy. That's because, as I said, the farmers larger numbers, but also that they have really roots in society because of the background.
Prabir, it's interesting that you say this. We saw the trade unions coming together with the farmers' associations and the farmers' unions. We saw sections, students, large numbers of women, including elderly women and young women. We saw people who were ex-servicemen. We saw different categories, artists, poets, writers, singers. In a sense, I was speaking to farmers' leaders today. They compared it to a second independence movement, a movement the kind this country hasn't seen for more than 7 decades. So I really think that this is a defining moment in the current contemporary history. Where do we go from here? Can the BJP capitalize on this? And its spin doctors say, look how great, how magnanimous our Prime Minister is. He's conceded the demands. The obvious question she has to answer, why did it take him almost a year and a half? Why did it take him after there was an agitation which was about to celebrate its first anniversary? Why did it take so long? That question still begs an answer.
And the more important question, even before that, is why did he not consult the farmers' unions? Why did he not have what is the normal healthy practice in parliamentary democracy, to have Parliament discuss the bills in detail, the 3 bills discussed in detail, shorn of the titles which are almost difficult to pronounce. But given that the content of these should have been, as has been in the past, discussed, and perhaps a lot of the embarrassment he's facing, he may not have faced if that had been allowed to happen. But coming back to the other question which you have been raising in your answers, which is, while there was disquiet in the BJP and obviously disquiet about the possibilities in UP, Lakhimpur Kheri was really a turning point. In that sense, it meant that it was no longer Western UP, it is no longer, as the BJP was saying, the Jat belt, Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, these are the only places affected, not others. But it was now spreading to newer areas. And farmers have been drawing sympathies from farmers across the country. From Tamil Nadu, as you have said, Bengal, other places, there have been sympathies. But Lakhimpur Kheri was an indication it was now going to infect probably the elections in UP.
You're right. Lakhimpur Kheri, more than many of us thought, that it would be a sort of an inflection point, a turning point, a tipping moment. Indeed, I think it is. I would agree with you there. On hindsight, we all become a little more intelligent. But that in Lakhimpur Kheri at that time, we thought, oh, people will forget about it. No. Look at the fact. The Minister of State for Home Affairs, who is working directly under the second most powerful person in the government, Mr. Amit Shah, the Minister for Home Affairs, he's still holding his position. He hasn't resigned. It took some time for the police to get its act together. The Supreme Court kept pressurizing the UP government to do something about it. And finally, the the person against whom these allegations are leveled is behind bars. If the government had acted faster, they may have controlled some of the damage. But once again, arrogance, hubris, the arrogance of power came in the way. And I think today they are possibly repenting why they didn't act faster, didn't act more decisively. I mean, after all, this Minister of State could have been easily told to put in his papers. Why wasn't it? You know, I mean, when you look at it that way, I think they made a number of mistakes, and they are repenting, I mean, for many of the mistakes they've made.
Well, I think these are some of the things we'll have to watch as further events unfold. But one of it is not simply that of arrogance of power as seen in this particular instance of Lakhimpur Kheri or of the farmers' agitation. It is also seen in the way the law and order machinery in UP acts. And increasingly it has come to a situation where the police believes it is not answerable to anybody. And once you have liberated the police from that, after all, they are an armed arm of the state. And if you do liberate them from the constraints which they are supposed to be under, you have the problems that we see. They barge into a hotel room.
And by the way, this person was supposed to be sympathetic towards the BJP and the RSS, this businessman in the Gorakhpur hotel. And if I may add one small point to add to what you're saying.
More than that, just not that instance, but the fact that a license has been given in the name of controlling dacoity, the police can shoot anybody. And as you have seen the front page news today, 7 people being shot in the same spot. And this is supposed to be a result of a clash. They were apparently fighting the police and they were shot in the same spot in the leg. And the photograph is there in the front page of a newspaper. I think Indian Express carries that page. So this is really liberating the police from all controls and saying you have now become a vigilante arm of the state and you can impose justice based on whatever you feel.
And when the government of Uttar Pradesh, headed by Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath, also known as Mr. Ajay Singh Bisht or Ajay Bisht, tries to project an impression that under his regime for the last 4.5 years and a little longer, actually law and order has improved. Now, when this narrative is questioned, they are again not happy at all. They are getting a little jittery. And if I may add one other question, I think when we mentioned this earlier in our discussion, the corporatization of agriculture. Yes. And the fact that at a time when the economy of this country over the last 1.5 years has been in a terrible shape, it was already in a state where it was slowing down. But even if you look at the government's own statistics, which can be questioned as many economists have, the fact is your economy shrank like never before. It shrank by almost 1/4 in the months of April, May and June 2020, and it continued to shrink. Under such a situation, where you have the richest men in this country, the capitalists, their wealth growing by leaps and bounds, them acquiring fancy properties in the United Kingdom, I mean, this is clearly so obvious, so blatant, that I think it is the message. I mean, the farmers are very clear that, look, you want to say we are the rich farmers? We are the guys who are funding this agitation? No. The really rich guys are the ones who want to benefit from that. I think a combination of all these factors have had an impact on what is happening.
I will close this discussion. Of course, the issues that you have raised need another discussion another day. But I must share this with you that, as you know, I spent a year-long time with some of the stalwarts of the Jan Sangh in those days.
During the emergency.
And they were very clear. And that clarity is also there in what Mr. Modi says, that it is the national capital, nationalist capital, Indian capital, who must be supported to develop India. So you can see in that ideology the reflection. The state sector is bad. It must be dismantled, handed over. any planning is essentially socialist. It needs to be dismantled. What you need to do is what Manmohan Singh also used to say, liberate the animal spirits of Indian capital in Jan Sangh's terms in those days, and in Manmohan Singh's terms, liberate the animal spirits of capital, and then development will automatically take place. You are seeing what happens when you liberate the animal spirits of capital, and that is what I think he wanted to liberate also for the Indian farmers. And I think that is the problem, which we need to have a discussion another day. Of course, you and I have been having this discussion for a very long period in terms of what happened in telecom, power sector, and so on. Thank you very much, Paranjoy, for being with us, sharing your insights, which you have been covering for so long, and also today, a historic day for the Indian farmers, the Indian peasantry. This is all the time we have today for our live broadcast, which is coming to you from NewsClick studio on the farmers' movement and the victory of the farmers, which today finally the government has conceded. Hope that you will be with us for this and our other shows as well.